Welcome to the 3DownNation podcast. I'm Justin Dunk, joined by John Hodge and JC Abbott. Fellas, we got the West covered. Jean is in Manitoba. I'm in the beautiful province of Saskatchewan. And JC is in the lovely province of British Columbia, fellas.
And Alberta doesn't count at all. We just forget about them.
We do have multiple contributors in Alberta, but you're right. That is the one Western province we don't have covered today.
Well, maybe we'll try to cover it in some form or fashion with our analysis here, fellas.
Oh, we're going to be talking about both of those teams at length today. Absolutely.
So don't you worry, Albertans. We got you covered, okay? We're not leaving you out. Today we're discussing Miles Brown's Labor Day Classic headshot on Zach Collaros.
A possible quarterback change in Calgary.
Lucky Whitehead's controversial tweet.
The Alouettes signing multiple players to contract extensions.
And whether or not the Elks can make the playoffs. But first,
Canadian quarterback Nathan Rourke threw for 325 yards and 3 touchdowns with 1 interception in the BC Lions' 38-12 win over Ottawa during Touchdown Pacific, though that performance was overshadowed by his decision to blow off a halftime television interview. Does Rourke deserve to be criticized for choosing not to talk to TSN, or should I say briefly talk to TSN?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have sung Nathan Rourke's praises on this show repeatedly, and I don't think that this one particular moment is emblematic of Rourke's entire character. I don't think that we should eviscerate him as a person or judge his entire, his entire personality, his entire everything based off of this one interaction. But it was a bad look, and it was inappropriate, if you ask me. Nathan Rourke is paying a lot. Nathan Rourke is the face of the league, whether he likes it or not. And he is getting paid $200,000 per year to market this league. And part of marketing,
not $200,000 this year.
Part of marketing your league is doing interviews with the rights holder. And there was a lot of feedback on social media about how halftime interviews are pointless. Personally, I don't much care for halftime interviews either, and I appreciate that Nathan Rourke is focused on the game and that he doesn't like doing interviews at halftime. And there is a delicate balance to take people behind the scenes a little bit between, those requesting interviews. Obviously, rights holders have more say, more sway with teams when it comes to requesting interviews because they are paying good money to cover these games. TSN reportedly pays to the tune of $50 million per year to have the exclusive television rights to the Canadian Football League, without which, by the way, there would be no money to pay Nathan Rourke his $200,000 of marketing money. But to me, this boils down to, can Nathan do 2 halftime interviews a season? Can he do 5? Can he do 9? I don't think he should be asked to do it every week, but he needs to be in a position where he can say, hey, this is a special game. It's Touchdown Pacific. We're playing in my hometown, my birthplace of Victoria, BC. I know that I'm going to get the halftime interview. I'm going to suck it up and put on my big boy pants and do it today. And then maybe in a week or two, then I can play the, I just did it card. And they can go ask for Alexander Hollins or Rick Campbell, because those are the types of things that you do in the business when you are trying to book player interviews. But to me, this was a bad look from Nathan Rourke. This was not excusable.
I think you're right to an extent, Hodge, because the reality is that Nathan Rourke is going to have to adapt to this situation, mature a little bit, and begin to shoulder that burden whether or not he likes it. However, I do want to push back on some of the social media backlash here against Nathan Rourke, because a lot of the people criticizing him, and there are valid ways to criticize him, are criticizing him wrong. They are suggesting that this had something to do with ego, or that he was big-timing TSN, blowing off Farhan, doing something of that nature. And that's simply just not the case here. The underlying root cause of this is Nathan Rourke despises talking about himself. And he hates being the center of attention and being the guy that everyone is pointing to as the reason for success. He hates it after games too, but he sits there and takes it and tries to deflect. He especially hates it during games. And he's had those conversations with TSN and the sideline reporters in the past that, hey, I don't want to do this. I don't like it. I really don't want to be asked to be on camera. On this particular occasion, there was a negotiation that happened behind the scenes between him and Rick Campbell to get him to come and do this. But once Farhand launched into his description of what was essentially Nathan's stat line, Nathan cut him off because he didn't want to talk about himself, and he went to the locker room. And yes, does he need to adapt a little bit to that circumstance and learn to take those questions? Sure. But the other element here that I think is forgotten, Nathan Rourke has been with this team for 3 weeks, right? He came into a situation where there was already an established starting quarterback that had previous relationships with receivers that he did not know personally, right? He's coming into a brand new situation. He's got to establish trust and chemistry with those guys. And if at the first opportunity, when he's playing well, it becomes all about him, that can distract from the team. He's trying not to upset the balance. He's trying to be the quiet worker and earn everybody's trust to keep that situation stable so there doesn't become a division between the VA guys and the Rourke guys. And I think there's a concern from his standpoint that if it becomes too much about him, that could happen. And in this circumstance, at halftime, he wanted to make it very clear in a viral moment that this is not about him. It's about the team and about the job that needs to be finished. So I don't blame him for this on that occasion. He gets a one-off pass. It was a nice moment that everyone looked at online, probably generated way more traction for TSN than anything it would have done if he had said anything of substance. But in the future, he's got to learn to handle it with a little bit of a different tack.
There are multiple angles here, and I feel like they all need to be explored. You guys have done a solid job here of trying to get to some of those angles. It's understandable from my standpoint for Nathan Rourke perhaps to not want to do these interviews. But when you become a franchise quarterback in this league, because it's no different from Zach Collaros to Cody Fajardo to Chad Kelly to Trevor Harris and anybody else that's a quarterback in this league, that there is going to be a lot of media requests for you. And also there are going to be a lot of questions asked about you and also to give perspective on your team. So that is something to me that Nathan Rourke needs to get used to. And I think even though he's uncomfortable with it, that some of these questions are no different than some of the other quarterbacks around the league would get. I understand wanting to deflect, and you can handle these questions however you so choose. So from that standpoint, I can get it that he's in the game, locked in, doesn't want to do a halftime interview. But the greatest quarterbacks in this league, greatest players in this league have done these interviews. So you need to understand that that is part of playing in the Canadian Football League. And you're playing for your hometown team in the place where you grew up. That is a natural storyline for the broadcaster, in this example being TSN. So I think all of those things need to be understood. Now, there are some things behind the scenes that I'm not necessarily going to go in here that I think might be a factor. But on the flip side of this, Hodge, you alluded to it. A lot of people will say, well, we don't really care for the in-game interviews because they don't give you much. Well, when we get a controversial one that stirs everything up, everybody seems to be upset with Nathan Rourke. Or I should say most people are upset with Nathan Rourke. This is a viral clip that I would argue is to the benefit of the CFL, arguably is to the benefit of TSN, because it generated so much conversation. The first thing I thought of when I saw this happen was Solomon Elamimian's, I think it was either halftime or post-game interview with Jermaine Franklin in Calgary. Halftime, boom, same thing. And he's trash talking while having the interview. That clip will live in infamy for years to come on highlight shows when they count down best in-game interviews or what have you. So from that standpoint, It was great. We saw it from the traffic on 3DownNation.com. We got a real, raw moment from a player. That is the most that you can ask for, I think, of these professional athletes who have become so good largely at spitting out cliches. Look at Zach Collaros. He doesn't really let us in very much. Sometimes he's kind of funny, but Hodge, you well know this. Even Mike O'Shea, right? He doesn't like these questions, but even he understands that he's got to go up there and he's got to be asked them, and he can answer them in the way that he wants, be it injuries or anything else. So I get it from all angles here. I can understand talking to a TSN source that they felt like Nathan Rourke embarrassed TSN, embarrassed Farhan Lalji in this standpoint, and perhaps threw a wrench into their halftime show because now you're going to have to make up that time somewhere else in your halftime show. I get all that. But if I look at this from way up on the sun or the moon or that 10, 20,000 feet view, I think it's a net positive for everybody because now people are going to say, okay, what happens? The BC Lions go on the road to Montreal. If Rourke plays well, does he talk to TSN? How does he deal with it?
I get that, yeah, and yes, if you subscribe to the thought that there's no news, there's no such thing as bad news, right? All attention is good attention. Then yeah, it was a good interview for TSN. And I will say, I don't like criticizing players who do or say interesting things because yes, we've all had to make a column at some point in our lives and make it taste like chicken salad when the quotes in the interview were actually chicken something else. I won't say the word.
Overcooked bland chicken. Let's just say that. But
I was thinking much worse than that, but we'll leave that be. At the end of the day, though, what Nathan should have done if he was unwilling to do the interview is just pawn it off on a teammate. And if he doesn't want to pawn it off on a teammate, then he has to suck it up and do the interview, right? You can't agree to the interview. Like, this is the difference between Rourke.
Do it.
This is the difference between Rourke and Solly. Solly went after an opponent and then looked to Jermaine Franklin and said, "What's up?" And then they did the interview. Nathan Rourke got halfway through the first question and then took his ball and ran home, right into the locker room. He threw a complete wrench in a TSN's halftime show production, which is not good when, again, you're getting paid all this money to market the league and TSN is the rights holder. The other thing I'll say is there are certain workplace things, right? We've talked about on this show this year, workplace harassment, things like that. There are things that no one should put up with in a workplace. But doing media at reasonable times when reasonably requested is 1,000% in the purview of a professional athlete's job. And there are aspects of everybody's jobs they don't like. If you're an orderly at a hospital, I'm guessing you don't love changing the bedpans, right? But you do it. Why? Because it's literally your job. So this is literally Nathan Rourke's job. I get that he doesn't like it. Again, there's parts of everybody's job that if they could change, they'd say, "Oh, I get rid of my boss," or "Oh, I wouldn't have to do this," or "Oh, I wouldn't have to work evenings," or "Oh, I wouldn't have to." I get it. We all have things like that. But this is a reasonable expectation for a professional athlete, especially one who is, again, certainly the face of his team right now, arguably the face of the league for years to come, and again, is making boatloads of that sweet, sweet Vancouver home-owning money to market the league. This was inappropriate for Nathan Rourke. Again, I'm not going to eviscerate him for life about this. This was a blip. He's a young guy. But I don't think that it's reasonable to write this off as, it wasn't a big deal. No, it was a big deal. I really do think it was.
The thing that makes it a bigger deal is when you consider the audience. And I know Joel Gasson is going to be pounding the table right now. He hates the in-game interviews, right? And I'm kind of with him there. I think there could potentially be a place for it depending how it's done. But ultimately for TSN, the reason why they do some of these in-game interviews is because of the audience. So in this instance, I have the TV rating for Touchdown Pacific. It was over 530,000 average viewers. When you have that kind of audience, you want to try to tell the stories of the biggest stars in the game that line up from a storyline perspective. And you can't write it any better than Nathan Rourke being in Victoria, playing well in the first half, and having a big lead. Okay, it's not like he played terribly, and TSN was asking him difficult, direct questions about playing terrible football. This is a much different situation. So as much as people hate him,
I think
and I don't
Nathan would
necessarily
have
love him, but I
preferred that, though,
understand
Doug.
them.
Like, Nathan would have preferred, like, he's shown that in the past.
Would
if he
he, though?
plays poorly,
But I
he'll
don't think it
stand up in
matters.
front and eat it, right?
It
Like,
shouldn't.
he would have preferred that question.
Fair, but it shouldn't matter. The nature of the interview. As long as none of the yeah, I guess there are like crazy over the line questions that somebody could reasonably ask. I've never seen in my time covering the CFL. I've never heard a question from somebody like that. But if it's a veteran reporter who is trusted to the point that they are being entrusted to do that type of halftime interview, it shouldn't matter if a player has the best game of his life versus the worst game of his life. He should do the interview. Simple as that. And if he's not, and if you're not willing to do it, then pawn it off on a teammate and go to them and say, "Hey, I'll buy you a beer after the game. Do this, please. I'm unwilling to do this."
Especially with a big audience watching, over 500,000 viewers. That's the point,
100%.
I think, where you can really resonate with TSN and their production team. And from Nathan Rourke's standpoint, he's a mentally strong guy, and there comes a point where when you have all this intense focus on you, and a lot of that is because you're the quarterback. Yes, part of it is because he's Canadian and he's Nathan Rourke and he's done what he's done, but he's still got a lot to prove here. But you have to be able to flick that switch. That is part of being a professional, right? You have to go from game mode to doing an interview, and literally those interviews are told to be only 2 questions. Sometimes a third question is snuck in there, and you'll see that at multiple times. And the reporter sometimes gets a glare, and I'm not talking Canada specifically, but more so the U.S. That third question gets sneaked in there. It's not really liked because everybody knows that it's either 1 or 2 questions depending on the situation. Like we have, for example, guys, college football in the United States. Kirby Smart, Georgia's playing Clemson. Kirby Smart did a interview before the game with ESPN. I think it was on ESPN. Did one at halftime, did one at postgame. Okay, I know he's the coach, and it's different because those players at universities are younger, but he understands the responsibility.
Yes.
So if you, as Nathan Rourke, as much as I have an affinity for Canadian quarterbacks, want to play professional football, and you get to the point where you are going to be, we think, in 2025 and 2026, the highest paid player in the league, these are the things that you have to get used to and do. I think he'll grow and learn from it, but it comes, as Hodge said, with the job.
And I want to hear JC's overall thoughts on Touchdown Pacific in a moment, but you touched on it. It's hypocrisy, right? And I appreciate that some guys don't like the spotlight, right? They eschew the attention. They're not a fan of it. But you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? You can't say, I want to eat 17 cheeseburgers and a giant pepperoni pizza for dinner every night, but I also don't want to gain weight, right? You can't do that. You can't say, oh, I want to be the starting quarterback and I want to be a star player and I want to make all this money, but, oh, I don't want any of the attention that comes with that. No, I can't do. No, that's unfair for anybody to expect me to deal with this attention. I'm not saying that's what Nathan did in this instance.
Ricky Ray, for example,
in
was
general,
like that, but he dealt with it.
He dealt with it.
Quiet guy,
right?
understood that he needed to do it.
Quiet stars have existed. And if you can stand in the pocket and take horrific shots from 300-pound defenders, you can certainly answer a couple of softball questions at halftime, even if you're a little bit shy, right? The fact like people are interested in you, which is the entire reason why you make all this money. You have to then follow that up with answering the questions. Anyways, JC, you were actually on site at Touchdown Pacific in what appeared to be a softball dugout covering that game. I would love to hear your take on the event.
It was a baseball dugout. Typically, the main tenant of the stadium at Royal Athletic Park is the Victoria Harbor Cats, which are a minor league baseball team. I'm not sure what league they're in. I think it's just a regional one. But there was no official press box, or at least not room for members of the media that weren't actually involved.
Don't be an old curmudgeon and whine about this, okay?
Hey,
please don't.
Let me be very clear. Hey, Doug, I'm going to cut you off right there because I do have an issue with this. I don't have a problem from my perspective.
Bro.
Hey, no, seriously. I don't have a problem from my perspective with how I had to cover the game. I'm quite content with it, okay? I'll take all the shots I want afterwards for how slow I write, but I was perfectly fine to mill around. I had great vantage points at points. I got to go into the stands. That's fine. I don't have to write on deadline. Some people had to write on deadline immediately after the game. Whether or not you think that's an efficient way to do business is irrelevant. Their employers demand them to file right after the game, and they did not have a view of the game, they did not have working internet, and they did not have electrical outlets. That is unacceptable. Okay?
That's fair.
And those people, unfortunately, don't have our platform publicly to be able to speak up for themselves. So I feel it's my responsibility as their colleague to say these because I do have these platforms. For me personally, it didn't matter. For other people, it did. It mattered a lot. And it made their jobs very difficult. And everyone had to work around them to try and help them out because of that situation. Now, from the event as a whole, it wasn't just where the press box was located where there were some issues, right? Like the stadium, there was almost 15,000 people in there. I think realistically it should have fit 13. It was a little bit overpacked. And that was okay on the south side where we were. It wasn't too overcrowded. The lines weren't too long. But if you got over onto the north side where the temporary stands were erected, especially pregame, the line to get a lemonade was the entire length of the field for like a little lemonade cart. There was not enough beverages to go around. There was not enough shade. There were some logistical challenges with how the event was put together. Even getting people into the stadiums, it was hour-long lines because there was only about 4 gates. Now, once people did get in and got in their seats, absolutely tremendous event. It was an electric atmosphere. People were right on top of the action. It was small. It was intimate. The crowd was rowdy. And the reality is, when you're watching a game at BC Place, especially a Lions game, it doesn't really matter how many people you shove in there, even if you've got 50,000 for the opener or 30,000 for a playoff game. Often the critique is that crowd's a little quiet. It gets a little vacuumous in there. Ever since they changed the roof, it doesn't get quite as loud, and it doesn't create a good atmosphere. This was entirely different. With about half of what they get for a playoff game at BC Place, it was twice as loud. It was noticeable. You couldn't hear yourself think at points early in the game when they were cheering. Everyone was into it. So that is a smashing success. I think that atmosphere, if you want to replicate that in Victoria again, or elsewhere at other venues across the country, if they take this show on the road.
Touchdown
That's
Northern
fantastic.
Canada. Let's do it, boys.
Yeah, do Fort Mac again. Fort Mac again.
No, further north, bro. They've had a game before.
We going up to Yellowknife or
Touchdown Arctic Circle.
Let's do it.
Hey, if we do it, again, great atmosphere. Logistically, though, I think there were some challenges. The volunteers were a little bit overwhelmed. The security was a little bit overwhelmed. And there was not enough of the basic necessities, including beverages, to go around, or at least to get quick access to on a day when it was 30 degrees outside.
Good, JC. You told me where to shove it. I appreciate it.
I do think with one-off things, right, there are always challenges. First times, there's always challenges.
Mm-hmm.
I was at the first game at when it was then called IG Field, and it was a complete another gong show. Lots of people didn't get into the building until halfway into the second quarter. And after a year or two, right, of people changing their game day habits and maybe how they get there, and the team learning and the game day staff learning where to keep things flowing, it eventually got very smooth. And now attending a game at Princess Auto Stadium is great.
Hey, Blue Bomber Talk and Ratio Breaker, how were your first articles that you wrote ever?
Yeah, probably not that good. Probably not that good.
I'd be in the same boat too, by the way.
How'd your first start at Guelph go? I'm actually asking about you. See, you're getting a chance to actually promptedly talk about your football career at the collegiate level.
If I remember right, the mighty Guelph Griffins went on the road and beat the York Lions at their stadium with Ricky Foley on the team. So it went pretty well.
Getting to play against Rourke would be a great first start.
It is. That's the only time anyone's bragged about beating Rourke before, or York before.
They had Ricky Foley, bro. Do you know how scary that was in film to watch that guy? Fast forward, rewind, slow motion. This animal is a guy I have to run zone read against in my first career start. Either of you guys want to do that?
Hey,
No, that's
there
why I
are
write about the game.
times. There are times in York's history where if you stuck just Ricky Foley on the field, it would have been equivalent to their entire defense.
I'll say real quick, the first time I pulled the ball on a zone read where I thought in my head that I had Ricky Foley, I felt like, I can't even say it in the podcast, but I was going to bleep down my leg. Like, I was like, did I make the right decision? Thank God I did and got to the outside, and I was running as fast as I freaking can, and that was scary stuff.
Zach Collaros was knocked from the 59th Labor Day Classic game in Regina when Miles Brown struck the quarterback's jaw with his shoulder pad and appeared to make helmet-to-helmet contact. Brown was flagged for roughing the passer on the play. What does Brown deserve as punishment for the hit? And does the CFL need to do more to protect its quarterbacks?
You know, I saw Wade Miller's comments after the game, criticizing the league, criticizing Randy Ambrosie for not protecting quarterbacks. To me, I think he's overreacting. I don't think that there's a problem right now in terms of protecting quarterbacks. And yes, I understand that a number of starting quarterbacks have been hurt, but that hasn't been on a legal play or things that you can do anything really to prevent. On this instance, it was a legal play, but it was penalized. And I'm sure it's going to be fined as well. And frankly, it should be fined. Do I think Miles Brown was going in there trying to take Zach Collaros out long term and seriously injure him? No, I don't think that's the case. Do I think he went in with some intent to get a little late cheap shot in on an opposing quarterback? Yes. I think that was exactly what was going through his mind, and he caught him a little bit higher than he was perhaps anticipating, and Collaros went down. Of course, he's got a history of head injuries, and he was held out for precautionary reasons. To me, hand out a max fine. It's not as serious as the headbutt from last year that Pete Robertson got a one-game suspension for. It's a monetary punishment and nothing more. The league handled it well on the field with the penalty. I don't think you had to eject a guy for that play.
If you're Wade Miller, though, this is multiple years in a row where your quarterback has taken a cheap shot during the Labor Day Classic. So I think that's where his anger, let's say, comes from. And it's understandable, especially when you have a player like Zach Collaros, who, yeah, we know about his headshots, but this guy's a two-time MOP and two-time Grey Cup winner who has led the premier franchise in the CFL for the last 4 seasons and potentially counting, because it looks like they're on their way to at least competing for first place in the West Division again after a terrible 0-4 start. So I can understand where Miller is coming from there. This hit did not need to be delivered, okay? Let's get to the heart of the matter. Miles Brown, what are you doing? The quarterback is in an ultra vulnerable position, and you decide to go in there with your shoulder and partially your helmet and hit this guy in the jaw and helmet area as even just another fellow player. That should never be delivered. Okay, let's just call it what it is. And I would argue that this potentially warrants at least a 1-game suspension because of the vulnerable position that Zach Collaros was in. And there are some people out there saying that once, that's an anomaly. Twice is a trend because Miles Brown ended up hitting Drew Brown low in Ottawa during that game that was a tie. Now, I think that was a little bit of a different situation, but when it starts to become a trend, people have this opinion of you. And again, as pro athletes, you control the narrative. Miles Brown, in this instance, the hit on Collaros, you control the narrative. It never should have been delivered, period, full stop, end of sentence.
Yeah, it was a bad hit. And I agree with JC that it was flagged appropriately on the field. Look, if you want the CFL to take the next step and ratchet it up, like, does roughing the passer become an immediate ejection? If so, we're going to have times, right, where there's a very borderline at best call, where there's a little, there's an incidental hand that, a player gets whipped around and all of a sudden there's a little bit of head contact. If you slow it down to, ultra slow-mo, and it's like, well, if you squint hard enough, it kind of is. Okay, I guess the player's getting ejected now. And then we're going to have another uproar from the CFL community going, well, why are we throwing out these poor defensive players for just, it's basically just like an unfortunate circumstance. Now, that's not what this is, but I'm saying moving forward, I don't know what the CFL is supposed to do here. I appreciate Wade Miller's frustration. Zach Collaros also took a nasty hit after the play in the 2022 Labor Day Classic from Garrett Marino. He handed off the ball to Brady Oliveira, kind of went around upfield, clearly didn't have the ball in his hands. Garrett Marino,
3 years in a row,
was a
Think
disgrace.
of how you would feel.
Anyway, goes in and mops Zach Collaros. And I've heard so many fans in Saskatchewan still complaining about the Shea Patterson hit that Adam Bighill delivered the first time these two teams met in July, which Corey Mace and Shea Patterson himself went on the record saying, we don't have a problem with this hit. So I can appreciate from the Bobber side why they are upset about this hit. I'm just not sure as a league what you can do to stop these types of things. I think, yes, levying a one-game suspension might have an impact, but it clearly didn't have an impact when they suspended Pete Robertson last year for the headbutt. Why? Because Miles Brown still hit Zach Collaros in the head. So I think what Wade Miller really wants is like a rewind button, like that remote control from the movie Click, where you can just go and you rewind it and take the hit away. He can't do that. Wade Miller has a lot of power in the CFL. He does not have a magical remote.
I don't think he wants the hit to be taken away. I think he wants some stronger punishment. Perhaps, Hodge, that's what you're talking about. We've seen it in the NCAA with their targeting rule, that there is a possibility, and sometimes it's going to be close, where you can get kicked out of the game. So if you're a defender, and let's say Miles Brown in this instance, and you're thinking about whether or not to deliver this over-the-line shot to Zach Collaros, and you have the idea in your head, maybe not in that split moment, but going into the game, that you could be kicked out of the game for one of those shots, I think defenders would treat that a little bit differently at the absolute least.
Yeah, and I still don't think that this hit would have qualified for an ejection under targeting rules either, though. And I appreciate completely illegal hit, completely unnecessary hit. I agree with you wholeheartedly there, Doug. But I think it's on that borderline area of not quite egregious enough that it would have merited that type of ejection for like helmet to helmet, crown of the helmet into a defenseless player type of ejection. To me, what this looked like was like when you're a little kid and you're fighting with your sibling and you give them a little love tap. You think it's just going to be a little love tap, and then all of a sudden they start crying and you go, "Oh, I didn't mean to do it. It was too hard." That's to me what this felt like.
I don't think Zach Collaros is crying about it.
No, but I'm using a metaphor here, obviously. Like, it was a hit that was intended to send some sort of message, but it went too far. And when you talk about the 3 hits in the 3 back-to-back Labor Day Classics, to me, this was the least egregious of the 3 by far.
I agree with that.
Both the force of the contact and how egregious it was. So I really don't think a suspension is merited here, and I certainly didn't think an ejection was merited.
The other thing I want to add here is Wade Miller seemed to talk about how the league as a whole has a really big problem with these quarterback hits, and I disagree with that. Vernon Adams Jr. missed time this year because he got rolled up on his knee. That's just an unfortunate circumstance. Trey Ford missed time due to a rib injury caused by him landing on the football. That's kind of just an unavoidable accident. Trevor Harris hurt his knee because, again, he got rolled up on. That is going to happen in professional football. Taylor
Cody
Powell,
Fajardo, non-contact injury.
Cody Fajardo pulled a hammy, right? The only head injury that we've seen to any quarterback other than Zach Collaros was to Taylor Powell. Like, this is not I'm not suggesting, by the way, that shouldn't be addressed. What I'm saying is, when I look at the league as a whole, I'm not saying like, wow, every other week there's a big illegal hit on a quarterback that causes them to miss it. No, this is just a rash of injuries to Zach Collaros in the Labor Day Classic. That is it to me. Should that still be fixed? Absolutely. The Riders need to be less dirty, quite frankly, in that rivalry game when it comes to Zach Collaros. But I don't see a big league-wide issue here, a big league-wide panic. I don't. Oh, before we go, I just want to say, I had a blast in Regina. This was my first Labor Day in Regina, and I want to tell a very quick story because I met so many fantastic people in Regina. I got to meet Matt, the beloved CFL fan who sent nachos to the league's head office in 2021. He gave us the full blow-by-blow of that story. The other story I want to share, I was walking around.
Whoa! You're burying the lead there. Matt was also the one that Pete and JC's Wheaties, and those two went back and forth on Twitter. JC, you need to reach out to this guy and make sure that he thinks you don't hate him, because that's what he thinks. He took a picture with John and I. We were very cordial.
Yep. He seems like a super nice guy.
Amends with him. He is.
Well, I would encourage him to just be a little less combative on Twitter if he wants a picture with me. That's all I'll say.
To be fair, the first thing I said to him was, "Are you calm? Can we have a nice conversation?" And he laughed. But sorry, continue.
No, he's also an accountant. I'm pretty sick of doing my own taxes, so I'm thinking maybe I'll ask Matt to do my taxes for me next year. But a story I want to share really quickly. I was at Wayne's World, which is the huge bomber party that happens just down the road from Mosaic Stadium. I was at Party in the Park. I was bouncing in all these places. Every single person I met, bomber fan, Rider fan, and everyone in between was super nice. I was in the Harvard Lounge at one point watching the excellent CKRM pregame show that you were hosting, Dunk, with Wes Cates. And about an hour in, I decided I needed to use the washroom. So I left to the left side. Yeah, I'm telling the story. I walked to the left side of the Harvard Lounge, and there's two big, they're not doored washrooms. They're just like open, large doors. You just walk in, like doorways, I should say. And the first one has a big sign for ladies' room. So I'm on my phone. I'm looking down. I walk into the second one, and I walk in, and I get up to look for the urinal, and there's like a bunch of women standing around, and I'm like, oh my God. And I panic, and I bolt out of there because I thought it was a women's room and a men's room, but it was just actually like a surprisingly huge women's room that had an entrance and an exit. I don't know why they felt the need to make an entrance and an exit. Like, it wasn't that big, but it was a bigger room than I thought. Anyway, I think only one woman saw me. She's a young woman, and I saw her laugh at my expense, which is fine because I'm sure I looked really stupid. And then I quickly used the other washroom that I wouldn't get arrested for using. Anyways, embarrassing moment, but I'm like, it's okay. No one noticed. It'll be fine. As I'm leaving the washroom and heading back into the lounge, I see the young woman who saw me in the bathroom, and she's sitting at a table with, I presume, is her family, and a man who I presume is her dad looks at me and he goes, "Hey, John Hodge, how's the women's washroom?" And I was like, no, of all the times to be recognized. So anyways, I shook his hand. I met his entire family. They were super nice people. They listened to the show. So I just wanted to say a shout out to them. I'm sorry. I very briefly walked to the women's washroom. I didn't know. And the signage was a little bit confusing, at least for me. Maybe I'm just stupid. I don't know. But the signage, I thought needed a little bit of work.
John, you're not the only one to make that mistake. I will come clean. I forget which week it was. I think it was probably the first game we did from the Harvard Lounge this season. There was nobody in the building, thankfully. Like, the fans hadn't been let in yet. Yeah. But I made the same mistake in the same bathroom, actually used the facilities, came out, and this lady was just walking in, and she looks at me and goes, "Am I in the men's bathroom?" And I look around and I go, "There's no urinals in here. I just used the women's bathroom." But thank goodness only one lady saw this, and we got it figured out together. And I didn't look like a complete idiot because there was only one person there. But as you said, Hodge, for me too, it was my first Labor Day Classic in Regina. I've been to Argos Ticats in Hamilton. I've been to Elks Stampeders in Calgary. But for the first time to be here for game day and have a sort of a part in it with pregame and postgame show, it really is a unique experience. And I think it was just heightened for Labor Day, but it's a provincial gathering place, Mosaic Stadium. I think that's really underrated, that it's either 50% or more of the people that come to Rider games are from outside of Regina. And this year, there was a noticeably blue tinge to the crowd. Hodge, we were talking about this in the press box with some longtime Regina media members, and even talking to some Blue Bombers fans after the game. They felt like it was the most amount of Blue Bombers fans that have ever come to a Labor Day Classic. And oh, by the way, That led to the biggest crowd ever at New Mosaic Stadium, which was over 33,000 people. I don't have the exact number in front of me. And some people were like, well, haven't they sold this out before? It's like, yeah, they've sold it out. But what they did actually to fit more people in, which I don't see this as a bad thing, was increase some of the standing room availability. So a very unique experience to go to this game. It is usually the highest rated television game during the regular season, though it was down year over year for the 2024 version. It still got up over 800, and I believe it was 69,000 average television viewers on TSN. And the vibe and the feel around the place is just immaculate. There was a lot of respect between the fans, except for a couple of kooks, we'll call them, that got into a fight. We'll talk about it later. But all in all, just a wonderful Canadian football atmosphere to be a part of.
It was great. I would love to go back next year. It was a fantastic atmosphere, a fantastic game. And honestly, even if you're not a Bomber fan, even if you're not a Rider fan, I would encourage any person, even if you don't like football, I would encourage anybody to go to this game, because this game is about more than the prairies. It's about more than football. It is just an electric atmosphere. It's like going to Auburn, Alabama, right? You don't have to care about college football. It's just an amazing spectacle. And so if you have the opportunity to go, you should go. It was outstanding. And Regina, I know JC has repeatedly said horrible and disgusting things about the city of Regina on this podcast, but I also think Regina is actually very nice in the summer. My wife's good friend from university lives in Regina.
I'm telling you guys this.
She took us around the legislature area. We had a beautiful dinner by the lake there.
John, why didn't you come run with me around the ledge?
I was busy. That's why. Very busy.
It's like when you tried to get me to do hot yoga the last time I was in Regina.
For me, hot yoga, any yoga is hot yoga, because that's how much I sweat. But no, I didn't do a run around the lake. I might have done a sit by the lake while you ran, but I didn't do a run around the lake. I ate chicken and waffles by the lake, and it was delicious. So yeah, I like Regina in the summertime, and I think Winnipeg is the same. If you come to Winnipeg in March, yeah, it's gross. But come back in the summertime, and Winnipeg is pretty beautiful. Regina kind of got the same thing going on. I'll respect.
I will respectfully provide no comment on either city and enjoy the beautiful West Coast lifestyle.
Like Mama told you, if you ain't got nothing nice to say, JC, keep your mouth shut.
Throw away the key. Jake Maier had arguably the worst game of his career for the Stampeders on Labor Day, throwing 4 interceptions and being replaced in the late stages of the game by second-year passer Logan Bonner. Dave Dickenson, who called his team's performance, quote, embarrassing, wasn't sure post-game if he'd make a quarterback change ahead of next week. Dunk. Should he?
This is a difficult question because I want to say yes, and I think there's some upside there with Logan Bonner, but Jake Maier seems to have this ability to bounce back when he doesn't play very well. Not all the time, but he can have some big games, and I think that kind of goes under the radar when we talk about the narrative surrounding him and his play and not living up to the billing that he had when he was this up-and-coming quarterback behind Bo Levi Mitchell and then overtaking him for the starting role. I would argue, though, that for this Stampeders team, it would be worth it to see what Logan Bonner can do on the field, but also how he can help the energy of this football team. There's something kind of lacking here, and I can't quite put my finger on it. But with the group, and I'm not saying it has to do with Jake Maier as a leader, but they just lack that zest for playing football at times. I don't know exactly what it is, but you expect better from a Dave Dickenson coach team and with John Huffnagel still involved. So I think there is some credence there, or you can understand why there might be a thought to put Logan Bonner in, because he seems to have a different energy about him. And there's a lot of people that speak highly of him in Calgary.
I was taken aback by Dave Dickinson's comments post-game, and shout out to our contributor, Ryan Ballantyne, for being there on the site and helping ask some of the tough questions that were asked of Dave Dickinson. This is a quote from Dave. Quote, "To me, our players look too comfortable. If you're not doing the job, we've got to go to the next guy. In the social media era, you don't hear or see quotes like that a whole heck of a lot, right? Nobody wants to have that viral quote that makes their team look bad or whatever. So first off, credit to Dickinson for not mincing words, but your words have to mean something, right? If you say that and you just change the backup long snapper, then why would your players listen to you ever again? You're clearly full of it. Like if you're saying that guys look too comfortable and that changes need to be made, you have to make changes, or else you're just talking for the sake of talking, right? That's not productive. So if I was Dave Dickinson, I would be making multiple changes in the starting lineup. I think I would start Jake Maier, but I would do so with a short leash. I think that Logan Bonner has the potential to be a great
don't think that
CFL
helps
quarterback.
Logan Bonner, right? Give him the reps and a full opportunity to see what he can do as the starter.
That is fair. The other caveat, though, is that the Stamps are on a short week and they're barely going to practice as it is. So there's not a lot of reps to go around regardless this week. I agree that if this was a traditional full week, then you just give Logan all 3 practices and you say, here you go, kid, sink or swim. Because he was on the PR all of last year. He's not new to the CFL. And I also think Logan Bonner has the potential, by the way, to be a terrible CFL quarterback. You never know what you got until the guy gets in the game, right? He was a good player at Utah State. He's a little undersized, but he could certainly run better than Jake Maier. Mind you, I think every CFL quarterback can probably run better than Jake Maier. The only thing I want to push back on is I've seen lots of people going, oh, well, it's just such a shame that Mathieu Schultz is hurt. Otherwise, the Stampeders could go to him. And with all due respect to Mathieu Schultz, who I think is a solid backup in this league, this is a 31-year-old man who has thrown for 19 touchdowns and 18 picks. Like, this is the criticism that I gave the Stampeders for this signing in the offseason. If you're looking for somebody to really push Jake Maier, like really push Jake Maier and someone who has the potential to be a true star in this league, Mathieu Schultz is not your guy. Like 19 touchdowns to 18 picks in 45 career games, 31 years old. Like Mathieu Schultz, barring a miracle, I feel like has topped out, right? We're not hitting the next layer of Mathieu Schultz. He started the East semifinal for the Hamilton Tiger Cats last year. Granted, it was against an excellent Montreal Alouettes defense, but he was terrible in that game. He was awful. He got replaced by Levi Mitchell in the last 6 minutes, and had the Ticats made a quarterback change sooner, they might have actually had a chance to win that game. With Mathieu Schultz, they did not, which is why I think that even if Mathieu Schultz was healthy, Logan Bonner should still be the next guy up for the Calgary Stampeders. The Stampeders bought a lottery ticket a couple years ago when they brought in Logan Bonner and they developed him. By the way, it's not that long ago that Dave Dickinson was heralded as the guy who could develop CFL quarterbacks, whether it was Nick Arbuckle coming out of that team or whoever else. It's time to see if he's still got it, because right now, Jake Maier don't got it.
Here's the reality when it comes to the Calgary Stampeders. Jake Maier is probably good enough to be a starting quarterback in the CFL. He's shown that he's inconsistent. He has some good games. He has a lot of meh games. He has some really bad games. But he's not a top half quarterback in the CFL, and he's not a top 3 quarterback in the CFL. And if you want to be contending for Grey Cups and winning consistently like the great Stampeders teams of yore, that's who you need. You don't need a quarterback who you can win with occasionally. You need a quarterback who you can win because of. And Jake Maier is not that guy right now. You could coast. You could have him there. You might even make the playoffs. But you are not a Grey Cup contender as your team is currently constructed and with its current quarterback. If you stick in Logan Bonner, could he be much worse? Absolutely. I think there's a 50-50 shot that he's worse than Jake Maier. But there's also a 50% chance that he's an upgrade and he can become that next guy that can take you over the top and get you into the top half and make you a contender again. That's a bet that I'm willing to take every time. They made that bet a little too slowly when they moved from Levi Mitchell to Jake Maier. I think it was ultimately a smart decision at the time. We've seen enough from Jake now. We know what he is. He's not a top tier guy. You need to go and find one, whether that's in the off season, going and trying to sign somebody like a Davis Alexander and thinking he could possibly be that guy, or give your in-house guy a shot in Bonner and see what takes. That's what you need to do to take the next step as an organization.
The Edmonton Elks are 4-1 in their last 5 games, with the only loss coming on the road against the reigning Grey Cup champion Montreal Alouettes, with the Elks favored to beat the Stamps again this week and sweep the Labor Day home and home for the first time potentially in 20 years. Is this a legitimate contender? Edmonton, that is. I can't believe I just said that. To win the Grey Cup?
By the way, credit to our contributor Andrew Hoskins for that 20 years factoid. I did not know that it had been 20 years. Granted, the Stampeders were an excellent football team for most of those 20 years, which helps explain it. But to me, the answer is yes, like 1,000% yes. Like, full credit to G. Roy Simon, Jarius Jackson, Jason Shivers, Steven Sorrells, this group that has rallied here in what we'll call the post-Chris Jones era. In football, if you have the better offensive line and the better defensive line, you often win. And that's beside the quarterback spot. Now, we've talked about McLeod Bethel-Thompson versus Trey Ford to death, so I don't want to go down that road. What I will say about them is they're both playing well right now. And when you got 2 good quarterbacks, that's also a better sign. I think the Elks have 2 quarterbacks better than any of Calgary's quarterbacks right now, which is probably why they're going to sweep the season series. But that unit of Martez Ife, David Foucault, you got Brett Boyko, Shane Richards, and Mark Cordy on the offensive line has been excellent. Shane Richards, former first overall pick, did nothing in 4 seasons with Toronto. The Argonauts tried to trade him away last year, couldn't find any buyers. Elks pick him up off the scrap heap. Wasn't even a day 1 starter. He has been excellent for them at right guard. I want to give full credit to him. And defensively, this is one of very few teams in the CFL right now who can get pressure with 4. Sean Oakman, since he was cut by the Toronto Argonauts, has been a hugely impactful player for them. And I also like their edges. Like you've got Taylor, you've got Brown. Guys have really stepped up this year. And I think Noah Curtis is one of the CFL's most underrated players, certainly most underrated Canadians. He has been a hugely impactful guy in the middle of that line. So we could talk about the receiving core, which is good. You could talk about the running back group, which is good. The secondary, I think, is probably just okay. But when you've got guys like Niles Morgan and Nick Anderson running around, like kind of oversized linebackers for the CFL game, but can get from sideline to sideline, I'm liking everything that I'm seeing about this team offensively and defensively right now. I think the Chris Jones stink has aired out of the building long enough. And I'm not saying that to be a Chris Jones hater. He's obviously done good things with Hamilton's defense and a short tenure at that team, which is great for him, great for Steeltown. But I think the atmosphere in Edmonton had been toxic under Chris Jones from the people I've talked to in that building. That air is fresh now. They've got guys who are playing really well, who, again, they in many cases picked up off the scrap heap. And that, I think, could power this team, certainly to a playoff spot. They're 4-8. It's not a good record, but their remaining 6 games, I'm going to rattle this off. I went around, by the way, this week looking at the strength of schedule for all the teams left in the West Division. Edmonton's is one of the weaker or one of the weakest strengths of schedule, which is a good sign for them. They've got Calgary this week. Then they have a home and home with Winnipeg. Tough, but I could easily see them split those 2 games. They have to host Saskatchewan. Hosting Saskatchewan a lot easier than going to Saskatchewan. They go into Calgary. If you win in Calgary on Labor Day, surely you can win in week 19. And then they host Toronto in the final week of the season. And who knows? The Argonauts might not even have anything to play for at that point. So I could see realistically this being like a 9-9 team coming the end of the year. That would be 5-1 down the stretch. And if you go 9-9 with the way the West is structured right now, I think you're certainly getting into the playoffs. Dare I say you could host a playoff game. What a turnaround that would be. I'm loving what I'm seeing from the Elks right now. And I want to give full credit to the people in that building making it happen, because I see it on social media the last few days. Well, maybe Chris Jones deserves more credit than he got for building. No, maybe the people who are doing the work and winning the games deserve the credit. Did Chris Jones make some good moves? Of course he did during his tenure at Edmonton. No one has said that Chris Jones is a complete and utter buffoon. Anybody who said that would be wrong. But the people in this building have turned it around, and they deserve credit for doing so.
And on that note, Hodge, I think a lot of us myself included, need to take a mea culpa here, because when this move was made and Chris Jones was fired and Jarius Jackson took over, before the move, everyone was saying there's nobody competent on that coaching staff to take over as a legitimate interim head coach.
I
And
don't
then once
think so. Didn't we think that Jarius Jackson could provide a new energy?
No, we said it. I'm saying general in the media. There was a lot of comments online that there was nobody competent on that staff to be the interim. This was the argument for not firing Chris Jones earlier. And then when Jarius took over, I'll take the blame here. I definitely said there was no way he was going to stick around in year 2, that he was just a placeholder. Well, what he's done so far has been wildly impressive. And if he continues on this same trajectory like Hodge has suggested, and you've got essentially, a 9-2 finish to the season by an interim head coach, not only do I think that demands that somebody has to stick around for another season, but do you put that person into coach of the year consideration, right? That is, if he does that record, again, 6 games away, that's a long time to go. If he can pull that off and get the Elks into playoff contention and finish 9-9, that would be an incredible coaching feat. So full credit to Jarius Jackson. And it's not just his head coaching either. What he's done with that offense in waking it up has been tremendous. Getting the running game going, it wasn't as big a factor this week, but in the past few weeks, that has been sensational. The addition of Tevin Jones into the receiving corps, taking him off the practice squad, and what he's done with that team so far. And with the 2 quarterbacks playing well, I'm sure Dunk will want to touch on the debate between, who starts next week between a healthy Trey Ford and McLeod Bethel-Thompson throwing for almost 500 yards this week. But they got 2 really good options, 2 guys playing at a high level, and an offense that is firing on all cylinders. Jarius Jackson has done a hell of a job, far better than I would have expected. And I take full responsibility. My comments were off base. He's done fantastic. Kudos to him.
Let the record show that the Elks' first win of the season came with who is the starting quarterback?
Trey Ford.
Okay. I'm not saying they should start him this week because McLeod Bethel-Thompson has found that it factor that he had when he helped the Toronto Argonauts win a Grey Cup in 2022. So I think it's a great decision to have. I'll leave that to the professionals. What I want to touch on here, and you guys are going to be surprised by this, is a defensive line. Because yes, Hodge, and I get these guys confused when you said his name earlier. Noah Curtis, a Canadian, has played really well. But Noah Taylor's stats don't necessarily show it. He is an absolute animal with a super high motor that has been hustling all over the field. And then Elliott Brown as well has 5 sacks. Those 2 guys, I feel like, have helped change the complexion of this defense. They've become legitimate pass rushers, definitely in the case of Brown, and I feel like really helped turn this defense over. Do you want to give some credit to Chris Jones for finding some of these talents? Kai Gray, you could put in there as well, and helping get this roster together? Yes. But ultimately, as a head football coach, and that was part of his other job description in Edmonton, he failed because there was not an atmosphere there that was cohesive to winning. Just look at his win-loss record. Perhaps if he was just the general manager, then he would deserve more credit and he maybe wouldn't have got fired. But I also think that Geroy Simon has made some subtle tweaks to the roster. And with Chris Jones gone, it's like everybody can breathe again there in Edmonton, can be themselves. They're not under this intense pressure cooker that is Chris Jones. And to be honest, a lot of the stuff that he preaches is BS. I'll just say it flat out, okay? Because of the person that he tells us he is, but what he actually is behind the scenes doesn't line up with it, okay? I think from the small town, not town, but time I've been in and around the Elks, and that was mainly when they were in Regina, Jarius Jackson is who he professes to be. Not a super energetic guy, but he's not fake either, and he doesn't put a ton of intense pressure on these guys, and he lets them play through some mistakes. And I think Geroy Simon is very much the same way. A personable, affable former superstar in the CFL who doesn't necessarily look down at any of these players because they can't play to his level. It's a very intriguing roster, and it's one that I think can make a run to win a Grey Cup, though. Seems like the ultimate stretch. And I don't want anybody out here talking about the 2011 BC Lions, okay? Because every team is made different. This Elks team has got the mojo, though, and I'm down to watch to see what they do down the stretch.
I don't think that Jarius Jackson will be coach of the year, even if the team makes the playoffs at 9-9, because I think that's Jason Moss's award to win or lose at this point. But I certainly think that Jarius Jackson could be the candidate out of the West Division, and what a story that would be.
USports played its first full schedule this past weekend as Canada West hit the field after sitting out the previous week. Of the 12 games on the slate, which one stood out the most to you?
Has to be the mighty Guelph Griffins going
Oh,
to 2-0 in the play of the week. The play of the week, fellas. Go look it up. Marshall McRae, number one in your program, but also number one in your heart. Hurdling a University of Toronto defender like it's nothing to get into the end zone. My man, Mark Surrey, as a head coach, has the Griffins flying high. Yes, there's a major test coming up against the Wilfrid Laurier Golden Hawks and Heck Crichton favorite, we'll call him Taylor Elgersma, on the road at their home stadium. So Guelph's going to have to go there. But those Griffins look mighty impressive, fellas. Go look that play up for real, though. Marshall McRae hurdling that dude. Unbelievable.
Just for the record, Dunk on this podcast today has hyped up wins over York and Toronto as the two Guelph games he's talked about.
That's wild when you put it that way. I'm not surprised to know. Usually before we do, I'll take people behind the curtain a little bit. When we're picking things like this, not all the time, because sometimes we want it to be spontaneous, but there are times where I will reach out and be like, who are you picking? I just want to make sure we're not picking the same guy or same game. I didn't do that here because I knew Dunk was going to take the Guelph Griffins game.
Hold up.
Completely
I'm
unnecessary.
super hard on the Griffins. You guys know that.
We all knew you were taking Guelph.
Yeah.
Did you see that play by Marshall McRae?
My game is the Ottawa GGs defeating the York Lions.
See it. Go look it up.
27-4. And the reason I chose this game is not because
you're clowning me for talking about beating the York Lions in my first start.
Yes.
You asked me that question, by the way. Now you're talking about Ottawa beating York?
Well, and it's because the York Lions, though they did lose this game by 23 points, it was not particularly close. This is a team that lost its 8 games by a combined margin last season of 518 points. And if you're sitting there going, how is it possible to go 0-8 and losing by a net negative of 518 points? That's like 65 points a game. And I'm saying, yeah, they lost their games last year, all 8 of them, by an average of 65 points a game. And that's only because against some of the top teams in the OUA, it was like 52-0 at halftime, and then they put in all the third stringers, and things were a lot more evenly matched down the stretch. But under new head coach Dexter Janke, there is a culture change happening at York. I don't expect this team to make the playoffs, obviously. I don't even know if they'll win a game this year. But what I do want to recognize and give credit for is that this team, when it would have been easy for the leadership of that school to go, holy smokes, our football program is like the most pathetic and futile thing known to man right now. They could have just packed it up and done a Simon Fraser. And not only did they not do that, but they made what appears to be an exciting hire in Dexter Janke, who is changing the culture there. He's having the player earn their logos, earn their stripes. It would be amazing.
Literally on their helmets.
Literally, that is what he's doing. They don't have stripes. They don't have logos. He's telling the players they have to earn those. And again, I don't know if they'll do it this year, but for the first time since I've been in or around USports football, which is, going on a decade now, I think that there might be a future for York.
You're getting old, bro.
Yeah, I'm younger than you, so suck it up. I think that York is a team worth watching. So I want to recognize that, give credit. Yeah, they lost by 23 points at home. And no, Ottawa isn't a powerhouse. But last year, this would have been a 65-0 game. And this year, it was a heck of a lot closer than that.
Boy, oh boy, guys. With all due respect to York and their potential turnaround and to the University of Toronto, I can't believe we're picking games where those two teams lost by multiple touchdowns. Come on, guys. Like, there were exciting games in USports this week with amazing results. Like, go out to the AUS. Bishops beat SegFX. That's their first loss in 5 years. That's an incredible result.
In the regular season.
In the regular
season. The Gators are firing on all cylinders right there with O'Shea Hosang in the backfield at running back. And then go out to the other side of the country. How about that statement win by the University of Alberta over UBC? The Vanier Cup runners-up last year, 42-28. That's a huge, huge result for that Golden Bears team. Great performance in the running game by 3 different backs, putting up 3 touchdowns, 220 yards. That is a real game changer in terms of how these teams out west are going to be ranked going forward. I'm sure UBC is going to fall down the standings considerably. Alberta might move up into the top 3 or 4 as a result of that game. These are legitimate contests with big-time implications for the standings and for the playoffs down the road. Not so much the 2 games you guys have mentioned.
JC, what's your alma mater, bro?
UBC, and they got their butts kicked. That's what I'm talking about.
You just wanted to talk about your alma mater, that's all.
Hey, I was talking about Alberta.
You accusing other people of talking about their alma mater is the best example I could think of the pot calling the kettle black. My goodness. No one ever talks about my alma mater, which has produced a CFL player despite not even having a football program.
Jordan Reeves,
Brandon University legend. Though it took me a while to like Jordan Reeves because growing up in Winnipeg playing Pee Wee football, yeah, that's right, Dunk. I'm going to talk about my old playing
I want to
days.
hear it.
We would go to play the Crescentwood Grizzlies, which I actually found out don't exist anymore, which is unfortunate. If you want to play football in Crescentwood now, they send you to a couple different places. I know that apparently tackle football in Winnipeg is the highest registration it's ever had before, which is very exciting. But the Crescentwood Grizzlies have fallen off. But we would go to play the Crescentwood Grizzlies, and Jordan Reeves would run for oh my God, like 700 yards and 8 touchdowns because nobody could tackle him. And I would get in the car feeling all sad for myself because we'd gotten kicked once again, and my dad would be over the moon. Why? Because he was a huge Winnipeg Blue Bombers fan in the 80s when Willard Reeves was out here winning MOPs and Grey Cups, and Willard would be at the game, wanting to talk, and he'd have his Grey Cup rings on, and my dad would be like, oh, I got to spend all this time with Willard Reeves. It was amazing. And I'm sitting there being like, well, I'm glad you had fun. I'm glad one of us had fun, Dad. Anyway, I digress.
Why wasn't he watching you?
Well, there wasn't much to watch. I'll be perfectly honest. When you're losing 75-0, I mean, we were the York Lions of Pee Wee football. At least a couple seasons we had good teams, but for the most part, and also it helped that Jordan and I were 1 year apart, so that we would only overlap once every 2 years. So in the off years, we could maybe get the Grizzlies. When he was playing, it was a one-man show. One kid show, I guess. I digress. It's now time for Hodge's Heritage Moment. On this day in 2014, Paul Williams passed away at the age of 67. The defensive back played 8 seasons with Winnipeg and Saskatchewan and remains the only player in CFL history to have scored a touchdown in 7 different ways. That's as a rush, a reception, interception return, fumble recovery, punt return, kickoff return, and missed field goal return. Dunk, do you think that this is a record that could ever be broken?
They usually say, and I hate cliches, all records are made to be broken, but 7 different ways is ultra unique. And I'm going to say at this point that that's a long shot that it's broken.
Yeah, you'd have to get somebody who was Deron Carter, but actually good at both sides of the ball.
Ouch. Deron Carter catching.
He was good at
strays.
Both sides of the ball at points, just not consistent.
Simultaneously.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, it's time.
Maybe Travis Hunter flames out in the NFL, comes up to the CFL.
No.
You crazy.
No.
He's smoking again.
Hey, stranger things have happened. Stranger things have happened.
I guess, Johnny Manziel was up here.
For a good time, not a long time. Actually,
let's go to the 3-minute drill.
It wasn't
JC. You are supposed to keep it quick, okay? Don't let the clock run out.
I'm on the clock. I'm ready.
The Montreal Alouettes have signed receiver Tyler Snead and offensive tackle Nick Callender to contract extensions. Which of those two was more important to get done and why?
Left tackles don't grow on trees, so it's Nick Callender. He's been very good on that offensive line. The BC Lions signed star Canadian pass rusher Mathieu Betts only one day after he cleared waivers from the NFL, and he recorded a sack during Touchdown Pacific. How big of an addition is he?
Absolutely huge. The Lions went from having no reliable pass rush on the D-line to having a very reliable pass rush. It made that defense look night and day different. Sean Lemon's indefinite suspension was upheld by an independent arbitrator. Dunk, does that mean we've seen the last of Lemon in the CFL?
I spoke with Commissioner Randy Ambrosi during the Labor Day Classic, and based on talking to some other people around the CFL, I get the sense that he really wants to enforce similar to what's happened in the NFL, where guys who bet on games were out of the league for at least a year. So with that in mind, I do think that down the line, there is a possibility that Lemon could play again in the CFL. The league's overhead field camera, better known as the Spider Cam, or it's probably TSN's camera actually, got stuck on Labor Day in Calgary. Hodge, what do you think of the stoppage in play?
I thought it was hilarious, and I thought that the quote from head official Andre Proulx was an instant all-timer. I'm not going to do the accent out of respect for the French Canadian community, but the quote was, "The game has stopped. The Spider Cam doesn't move anymore," which was hilarious and awesome. I loved it. Canada's men's and women's teams were held off the podium at the Flag Football World Championships. Is that a surprise?
It's not. They entered the week 9th and 12th in the world, respectively. They finished 5th and 7th. There's a lot of work that has to be done in the 4 years to qualify for the Olympics, and hopefully the addition of some CFL and NFL players will help push those teams towards qualification eventually. The Minnesota Vikings have signed Canadian-American QB Brett Rippon. Will we ever see him in the CFL?
I doubt it. He seems like one of those career backup types. We got a up close look at him on Hard Knocks when he was with the Chicago Bears before he signed with the Vikings, and he's made almost $4 million USD, and this season will likely cross over that. So I highly doubt he ever plays it down in Canada. The Edmonton Elks benched kicker Boris Beatty for the Labor Day Classic. Then Dean Faithful missed a 29-yard field goal in his season debut. Which of those two should be the guy kicking the football for Edmonton moving forward?
We sung Edmonton's praises earlier in the show. This is the one aspect of their game that frankly stinks. I'm going a secret option C. Get me a guy who can just make field goals. Every other team has one. They all do. Lucky Whitehead offered to buy a beer for one of the Blue Bombers fans who was caught on video fighting in the crowd during the late stages of the Labor Day Classic. What did you think of Whitehead's tweet?
I thought it was an absolutely despicable tweet by Whitehead, a terrible decision for him to put that out there on social media, and I think he will be rightly fined by the Canadian Football League for violating their social media policy and their code of conduct. You cannot be encouraging fans to fight in the stands and reward them with beer. That is the biggest no-no. The Calgary Stampeders paid tribute to Johnny Gaudreau prior to the Labor Day game at McMahon Stadium. Was that a nice gesture?
It definitely was. There were a number of Stampeders who showed up wearing his jersey to the game. They had a 13-second moment of silence. Very well done by CSEC with how they honored the late Gaudreau. The Alouettes have already clinched their spot in the CFL playoffs. Do you think Montreal will repeat as Grey Cup champ?
I think it's early to say that. I give them credit, obviously, for the fantastic season they've had. But remember last year, it was like, well, Toronto's just going to sleepwalk to the Grey Cup. And they didn't even make it, right? So you got to win when it matters most, and that's in the East Final. So they should be the favorites right now, full credit. But it's too early to say they're going to repeat. They're going to be in contention. That's all we know. Last one, the Red Blacks have released starting running back Raquel Armstead on Tuesday. Was that a surprise?
From a statistical standpoint, yeah, sure, but you can't take that many dumb, unforced penalties for your decision-making on the field and getting into it with people after the whistle and still keep your job. Whatever was going on between Reichwell's ears, that's what cost him his employment with the Ottawa Redblacks, and I think the team, frankly, should have pulled the plug a little bit sooner.
We thank you, as always, for listening to the 3DownNation podcast. For Justin Dunk and JC Abbott, I'm John Hodge. Enjoy this week's games. We'll see you next week.